Good afternoon, everyone. During Wilford Woodruff's 10-year administration as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he and his counselors in the First Presidency issued many mission calls to Latter-day Saint men. In turn, these men sent many letters back to the First Presidency, saying whether or not he would accept that call. Although one might assume that these letters would be rather formulaic and interesting, they are actually full of vivid detail of the lives of 19th century Latter-day Saints and how those lives were impacted by the call to leave everything behind and serve as missionaries. In this paper, I will talk about the various challenges and obstacles in missionary service that these men faced as they considered whether to serve, as well as some of the special requests they made of the First Presidency to help mitigate their challenges. I argue that a close study of these documents gives a greater appreciation for the sacrifices and faith of those called to serve missions during this period. When I began this project, I quickly realized it would not be feasible for me to study all the mission call response letters Wilford received during his time as church president. In 1889 alone, the year Wilford sustained as president, I identified around 270 letters addressed to him. So, as a preliminary study, I chose to closely examine 135 of these letters from 1889, where half of all letters sent to Wilford that year. The men who wrote these letters are very diverse in terms of age, economic status, and location, living in cities and towns across the western U.S. And the letters were written at various points during the year, from January through December. Thus, I consider these letters to be a representative sample that can give us a good overall picture of the men who were called on missions in 1889. In these letters, men responded in a variety of ways to the call to missionary service. Some accepted their call with a simple, straightforward yes, committing to be ready to leave on their assigned departure date. However, there are many others who accepted mission calls, but they phrased their acceptance in a much more tentative and qualified way. For example, George Jecks wrote, "I will try and be on hand at that time, knowing nothing to prevent me being present, hoping that it will be nothing." Then James Horn similarly said, "If nothing happens more than I know of, I will try and be on hand at the time." However, Dahlquist went further, saying, "I will try," with the word try underlined, "to be on hand, ready to start on the day named in your letter. But if it shall be found that I cannot straighten up my affairs by that time, I suppose you would grant me a short extension of time, but I will do my uttermost to get ready by the day above named." Beyond these three examples, there are many other acceptance letters that use a similarly cautious, careful wording. At first glance, the seemingly faltering and hesitant tone in these letters might make us think these men lack commitment and desire to obey the call to missionary service. However, in all fairness, these tentative responses seem to reflect how unstable and unpredictable their lives really were, rather than any lack of faith or commitment. Frontier life in 1889 was often challenging and unpredictable, in spite of all one's work and effort. An early freeze or bad storm could destroy the harvest. An unexpected work accident could leave a farmer injured. Sudden illness could devastate struggling families. For this reason, it could be argued that these men were just being realistic when they used such tentative responses. This is clearly illustrated by the experience of Hans Ericsson, who initially responded to his call declaring, "I will do all in my power to be ready till the date named in your letter, as far as my circumstances will allow." Then, 4 months later, he wrote back, saying, "I have done all my power, but I am not able to get enough money." And he asked how his project would postponed by a month. It was not always easy to know for sure what one's financial situation would be just a few months away. Thus, their hesitant but willing response letters may often have been the best answer they could give. Other letter writers told the First Presidency right from the start that although they were willing to go, they would need extra time to get ready. One of the most common reasons why missionaries requested a later departure was financial difficulty, often unpaid debt. For example, J.T. Crane told his leaders, "I am in debt about $300, which I cannot cancel by February 20th, but I will do it if you allow me until April." There were also many other challenges that led missionaries to request more time to get ready. Brigham Johnson explained, he needed to resolve a legal contest against my farm, which no other than myself can attend. 10 days before his own departure date, Antoine Hovan communicated to the First Presidency that he'd been quite sick for almost 4 months and would need more time to recover. And Charles Gladwell wrote that his wife had recently died, there was no one to watch his house in his absence, and that he'd be preparing to get remarried in the fall. Another letter writer was not able to immediately begin church service as a missionary because he was already preoccupied with other church service back home. Bishop John Clark said he was willing to go on a mission, but needed time to settle the ward's tithing accounts with the stake, find someone else to run the local cooperative mercantile store for him, and prepare his ward for his absence. While Bishop Clark was willing to be both a missionary and a bishop at the same time, another bishop was not so sure. Bishop John Booth of Provo wrote the First Presidency, "I notice that matters in the ward suffer when I am away, and are likely to, except someone else should be appointed to the bishopric." He was willing to serve, but was concerned that he had 2 church positions, he would not be able to fulfill both accurately. Others sought to delay or decline mission calls because their efforts at home were making this missionary service of others possible. Hans Jensen asked to have his mission postponed for a year because he was looking after the property of Brother Anderson, who was serving a mission, and would return to Fayetteville when Hans went on his own mission. Hans also explained that he had taken upon himself the debt of one of the elders that had left this place for a missionary field, which he was still working to pay off. Hans's everyday efforts were making it possible for at least 2 of his neighbors to preach the gospel. Although there were many men who wanted a delayed departure date, it was extremely rare for someone to actually turn down a mission call. Of the 135 letters I examined, in only 7 did the writer actually ask to be excused from service. That's only about 5% of all the letters. About half of those who declined their call had serious health conditions keeping them from serving. The fact that the vast majority of letter writers said they would serve is a great demonstration of the religious devotion of these men, who were willing to make great sacrifices to obey what they believed to call from God. Of course, most of these obstacles to serving a mission, like debt, illness, and family need, were not unique to the late 1880s, or even to Wilkes' presidency as a whole. These difficulties affected many men's decision of whether or not to serve a mission, both before and after 1889. However, one issue affecting missionary service that was unique to the 1880s was the federal government's intensive campaign to squash the Latter-day Saint practice of plural marriage. Throughout this decade, government forces worked doggedly to implement anti-polygamy legislation by prosecuting and imprisoning Latter-day Saint polygamous men throughout the western U.S. This led many men and their families to go into hiding, which was called going on the other ground. Anti-polygamy prosecution was reaching a climax in 1889, just 1 year before President Woodruff issued his famous manifesto that began the process of ending plural marriage. Obviously, something that so deeply affected Latter-day Saint people would impact the decision of whether or not to serve a mission. And to me, this was one of the most interesting elements of these 1889 letters. You can sense a tension and fear of these times in Hans Ericsson's letters to Wilford Woodruff. He writes, "I was arrested last year, but as there was no evidence, the case was dismissed. But I am in danger every day of being arrested and charged with adultery." This was one of the reasons why he wanted to accept his mission call, declaring, "I would rather go to Scandinavia than penitentiary. As I hope I can do more good there." However, going on a mission can only save someone from prison for so long, as a letter from Bryant and Lewis Fox shows. These 2 brothers explained that their polygamous father had, quote, recently returned from a mission to the southern states, and has since returned to the idle penitentiary for 5 months. Once the mission ended, the federal marshal would still be waiting for him. The federal anti-polygamy raids also affected entire communities. When Leonard Delane wrote a letter to President Woodruff, requesting more time to prepare for his mission, it was the counselor in the bishopric, Peter Olson, who endorsed his letter, rather than the bishop as was customary. This is because the bishop was hiding on the underground himself. In fact, according to Brother Olson, many of our brethren here are in exile, one in the penitentiary, and and 2 more going there before long. The absence of so many men was making it hard for the board to function, which is why Brother Olson reasoned that Brother Lange would, quote, be of great service to the board under the present circumstances at home, and asked for the mission call to be delayed by a year. Around the same time, Idaho Latter-day Saints were facing a particularly unusual challenge. All Latter-day Saints there had their voting rights taken away because of the church's doctrine of plural marriage. In October 1888, in order to work around what they believed to be an unjust situation, some church leaders briefly endorsed the practice of church members temporarily resigning their church membership during the election, then getting membership reinstated after the election. Leaders quickly changed their minds and began discouraging this practice, which in the end didn't really achieve its purpose. But by then, hundreds of Latter-day Saints had resigned their church membership in Idaho. John Long was one of the Latter-day Saints in this awkward and difficult situation in early 1889, which got in the way of his being able to serve a mission. Writing on behalf of Long, Bishop John Clark of Weston, Idaho, said, Brother Long is one among the many who resigned his position in the church for the cause of political liberty in Idaho. He, as well as many others, are watched closely by our enemies, and cannot under present circumstances accept the mission. He is willing and will be glad to go, and thinks that in the near future there will be a change and he will be at liberty to accept. These valuable letters showed pressure that church members and church leaders were under, as the anti-polygamy efforts came to their breaking point in the final year before the Manifesto of 1890 was issued, and how the anti-polygamy campaigns affected the ability to spread the gospel throughout the world. In my research, I also noticed that missionaries occasionally made requests to serve in specific locations, while typically missionaries themselves made these requests. In one case that I saw, it was the mother of a missionary who asked. Anna Hellstrom of Colonia Juarez, Mexico, wrote the First Presidency, saying she had heard that her son John, who lived in Richmond, Utah, had been called on a mission to Europe. She informed him that John's wife had just died in childbirth, leaving him with 3 small children, and no relatives near him to help care for the kids while he's on his mission. So, she proposed, if it is not asking too much, could his mission be changed from Europe to Mexico? And he be appointed to help build the descendants of the saints in this land? She said that she could watch his kids while he could help her in old age for farm work, arguing that this would thus assist him and me in helping each other. Although this seemed like a great idea to Anna, it did not sound so good to John, who apparently had not been consulted first, and was very surprised to hear what his mother had done. After the First Presidency sent John a kind letter asking about his situation, he wrote back, I hastened to reply, will say to my good old mother, no doubt feels interested in my welfare, but my wife's parents and relatives reside here in Richfield, and are willing to care for my little ones during my absence into the missionary field. I do not care nor wish to go to Mexico, or anywhere else in particular, except as before stated, only where the Lord through his service alone. As mentioned, besides this rare but interesting example of family drama, it was usually the missionaries themselves who requested a specific mission location. Most often they requested to go to their family's place of origin so they could gather genealogical records. This is actually the case with John, who, rather than accepting his mother's request that he go to Mexico, wanted to serve in Europe where he had been called, and specifically in Sweden, his home country, where he could gather information on his ancestors. John and others like him saw this as another benefit that could come from the missionary service. As has been seen, these men made a variety of special requests in their response letters. However, after making their leaders aware of their hardships and difficult conditions, they would usually say they were still willing to leave on the requested date if it was what their leaders wanted to do. For example, Gottfried Eschler wrote, if I look at it naturally, it looks almost impossible for me to leave my family the way I have to leave them. But I will do according to your request and will not offer anything for later counsel. It's important to note that in all the letters I looked at, I never saw a single case in which the First Presidency required someone who asked for an extension or a priest to fulfill their call. Yet it is still striking that so many of these men said they were willing to obey their leaders, even if it meant doing something that seemed impossible. Although we cannot read the minds of these men, We can still speculate what motivated them to do this. Some may be offered to go no matter what, not because they actually expect to be asked to serve after describing their difficult circumstances, but simply the sign of conventional courtesy and respect to leaders. However, there are likely many others who sincerely meant that they would make any sacrifice they were asked to offer in order to fulfill what they considered a divine calling from God. The level to which some were willing to sacrifice for God's work is dramatically demonstrated by a letter written by Oliver Cowdery Gunther. Oliver received a mission call to New Zealand just 8 days before he was planning on traveling to the University of Michigan to study law. He explained to President Woodruff that studying law was the great desire of my heart, and that he had, quote, been planning for the accomplishment of this for several years. Now that he had succeeded, finally surmounting every apparent obstacle of any consequence, he received his mission call. Nevertheless, he declared, I feel like sacrificing all of these funds to